Tonight, we continue our investigation of a dirty secret in Washington.
Do you agree with me this is one of the darkest moments and it needs to be fixed?
Yes, sir. We have an epidemic of rapes and sexual assaults within our own government, and Congress is missing in action.
I feel betrayed.
And we'll take a closer look at the president's plan to rebuild our bridges and roads, how it would work, who would pay for it, what it would really cost, and what it could mean for Florida. But we'll start with a closer look at the president's speech, where he scored and where fact checkers are calling him out. This is Money, Power, and Politics. Well, fact checkers called out President Trump quite a bit this week, and I want to start by putting some of that in perspective. We call out both sides when they miss the facts. To that end, we called out President Obama, you might recall, quite a bit.
If you like your doctor, you'll be able to keep your doctor.
You can keep your plan.
And now we call out President Trump when he misses or exaggerates. That happens quite a bit because Trump deliberately exaggerates as part of his approach to the job.
I guess it was the biggest electoral college win since Ronald Reagan. Well, no, I was given that information. I don't know.
And our job is to call him out when he does that, just as it was with President Obama.
That's a red line for us. A red line for us.
I didn't set a red line.
If we don't confront this now,
our capacity to execute this mission is not time sensitive.
Unbelievably small, limited kind of effort.
The United States military doesn't do pinpricks.
And that could bring us to the problem with the president's boast about tax cuts.
We enacted the biggest tax cuts and reforms in American history.
Well, the facts show we passed bigger tax cuts under Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama. And if you adjust for size and inflation, we also passed bigger tax cuts under Reagan in 1981. And under the Trump tax cuts for individuals, they expire, which could cost working class families more in the long run.
We are now very proudly an exporter of energy to the world.
He says we're now an exporter of energy. Well, we've been exporting energy years before President Trump took office. We could cite other points in the speech or Trump's boast that, according to Nielsen's number, it was the most watched in history, when it certainly was not. The Nielsen numbers show Presidents Obama, Bush, and Clinton each drew millions more in prior addresses to Congress. Bottom line, Trump wrote in his book that he plays to people's fantasies. He wrote that in The Art of the Deal, he exaggerates as a form of self-promotion. And to that end, we want to move beyond the specific speech lines and focus more on the substance of what he's promoting and what he's up against in Washington trying to get it passed. And that now brings us to the plans to rebuild our bridges and our roads. That may not cost taxpayers as much as you may think, and it may not deliver as much to Florida as you may want.
Tonight, I'm calling on Congress to produce a bill that generates at least $1.5 trillion for the new infrastructure investment.
We've heard that call to rebuild our aging roads and bridges over and over again. In fact, President Trump said nearly the exact same thing in his speech last year.
To launch our national rebuilding, I will be asking Congress to approve legislation that produces a $1 trillion investment in infrastructure.
This year, the president added $500 billion to the price tag, with no specifics beyond general proposals that have gone nowhere so far in Congress. Meanwhile, a trade group of road builders say more than 50,000 American bridges are falling apart. And if repairs started today, builders claim it would take nearly 40 years to get them all fixed.
Every federal dollar should be leveraged by partnering with state and local governments and, where appropriate, tapping into private sector investment.
Well, both sides say we need to rebuild, but they differ on the approach. When President Trump says he wants $1.5 trillion, he does not mean that much in federal tax dollars. The proposals are more like $200 billion, with local governments and private builders putting up the rest. House Speaker Paul Ryan said private investors would put up much of the money, which they could then recoup through tolls or user fees. In other words, they're looking at incentives for private operators to build more toll roads. And that's why a lot of Democrats aren't buying into it.
His plan that he did not explain would do it all through toll roads and tax credits for the wealthy, not through the investment that we need to back up our cities and our counties.
We don't know what the president's plan would bring to Tampa Bay. Last year, the president rolled out a preliminary list of 50 infrastructure projects he wants to kick off his rebuilding campaign with. There were none in Tampa Bay, none in Central Florida. Florida, in fact, only had one on the list near Miami, and that road project has already received the money it needed to get built.
While the call to rebuild our transportation network may affect the most people, the president and Congress are also trying to strike a deal on immigration, and many conservatives in Trump's own base may have felt betrayed when he said this.
The first pillar of our framework generously offers a path to citizenship for 1.8 million illegal immigrants.
Remember, Trump decided to end the DACA policy that shields dreamers from deportation. Remember, Trump took off in the Republican race for president by promising a mass crackdown on illegal immigrants, not a path to citizenship.
If they've done well, they're going out and they're coming back in legally. Because you're rounding them all up. We're rounding them up in a very humane way, in a very nice way.
And remember, Trump took down Jeb Bush by tearing him apart for showing sympathy to dreamers.
Bush, let's say he's president. I watch Jeb Bush. He's a joke on immigration.
It's an act of love.
An act of love. It's an act of love when they come in.
And now, not only did Trump call for a generous path to citizenship,
generously offers a path to citizenship for 1.8 million illegal immigrants.
He added that it was far more generous to illegal immigrants than anything President Obama ever tried.
That covers almost 3 times more people than the previous administration covered.
Last week, Breitbart ripped Trump, called him Amnesty Don for supporting amnesty for nearly 800,000 illegal immigrants. Trump responded by telling Congress and the nation he's not talking about just 800,000. He's talking about 800,000 plus a million more.
Generously offers a path to citizenship for 1.8 million illegal immigrants.
And that's where the first pillar of Trump's immigration plan will surely cost him some votes on the right. Meanwhile, he's also calling for building a border wall at taxpayer expense. As his chief of staff explained, the Mexican government will not be paying for it, no matter what anyone might have said on the campaign trail.
We're going to make them pay for that wall.
He has evolved in the way he's looked at things. In one way or another, it's possible that we could get the revenue from Mexico, but not directly from their government.
And that may cost him with fiscal conservatives who worry mostly about our soaring debt and our path to going broke. Then Trump's other pillars to his immigration plan call for changes and more restrictions in legal immigration. And that will surely cost him some votes, many votes, in fact, on the left. The president deserves a good deal of credit for tackling a big issue here and now trying to bring both sides together on it. But at this point, realistically, his chances of getting this plan for compromise passed may be only slightly better than if he had never been born. Immigration is a powder keg in national and state politics. And that happens to bring us to the other immigration controversy playing out right now across the state of Florida. House Speaker Richard Corcoran says he's trying to keep Florida safe with his plan to ban sanctuary cities. And his committee, his PAC, released a fiery new ad. And Evan Axelbank is going to show you why it is already drawing a very strong response.
The actors are staged on a cookie-cutter suburban street.
A young woman gunned down by an illegal immigrant who should have been deported, but was protected by a sanctuary city.
The images would make anyone freeze. The ad will run on Fox News this month. In it, Richard Corcoran invokes the name of Kate Steinle, a woman killed in 2015 by an undocumented immigrant named Jose Zarate, who fired a bullet that ricocheted off a San Francisco pier.
I thought about my own daughter, Kate, and how this could have happened to any family anywhere.
Corcoran points out the shooter, who was acquitted of murder but found guilty of weapons possession, had been deported several times and returned to San Francisco, where only in certain cases does the city allow local law enforcement to cooperate with ICE. That failure was criticized by members of both parties. Corcoran wants the state legislature to ban so-called sanctuary cities in Florida.
The ad says that we want to end that practice. We want to make sure that never happens to another American, another family.
But pro-immigrant groups say the ad is insightful and anecdotal. They point to several studies, including a 2017 one from the pro-immigration Cato Institute that said undocumented immigrants are 44% less likely to be incarcerated than natives.
I really think that this ad profiles the immigrant as to be a criminal. And I really think that we have a lot of immigrants here in the States that they just want to work and provide for their families.
Corcoran's political team put the ad out the same day fellow Republican Congressman Ron DeSantis kicked off his own campaign for governor in Boca. DeSantis has been endorsed by President Trump, but both want to win over his supporters.
I've been proud to stand with my fellow members in voting to defund sanctuary cities.
The campaign for the third Republican in the race, Ag Commissioner Adam Putnam, said that they had no comment about the ad, but one of his staffers did write on Twitter that it was Putnam who was first to make sanctuary cities an issue. On the Democratic side, candidate Andrew Gillum, the mayor of Tallahassee, called the Corcoran ad vile and race baiting. Corcoran says that he is not going to make public his decision on whether to run for governor until after the legislative session. Craig.
Okay, thank you, Evan. And I'm here now with Republican Adam Goodman, Edward R. Murrow Fellow at Tufts University, strategist. Thank you for joining us. First off, are there sanctuary cities in Florida?
No, it's really not a relevant issue in Florida, but it is a red meat issue where people, in this case, I guess, Speaker of the House, Richard Corcoran, is trying to use this to show he's to the right side, you might say, of the immigration debate, but is not in terms of Florida and its relevance to Florida, it is not in play.
Let's talk about the Washington debate. Do you think President Trump can pull off the pillars of that compromise? I say chances are not very good at all.
The American people really want something to be done actually on immigration, a more secure border, a clarified policy, and some kind of, you might say, compassion shown to the children of DACA. And he doubled down on DACA, but he also doubled down on his insistence that we're not going to go soft when it comes to protecting our own borders.
Well, where that leaves us is both sides double down on their resistance, and the votes just don't seem to be there.
Well, the problem for the Democrats in this case is he met them not only halfway, but all the way, and then some on DACA. He's just asking in return for a more complete, comprehensive immigration policy fix, and I think the American people want that as well.
You know there is speculation that Trump may want to get rid of Mueller before his investigation is complete. Do you think that would happen, and what might happen if it does?
Well, two things on that. One is the train's left the station. The Mueller investigation continues on, and Mr. Mueller will be in place, my prediction. Number two is, I think what we really have to be careful of here, both sides, is what's happening in terms of the FBI, where the misbehavior perhaps of a few who issued emails inappropriately could maybe disparage an entire bureaucracy that we trust here in America to do the right thing in keeping us safe.
Which could, among other things, compromise national security. Can you unring that bell?
We need to. I think sometimes we go so far in trying to score a political point, we lose the game.
Adam Goodman, thank you as always for your time. Good insight.
Thank you.
Coming up, we'll investigate a wave of sexual assaults in our military and the plans to stop it. Well, for months, we've investigated sexual assaults in the heart of our nation's government, and the victims say the Me Too wave has left them behind. That's tonight's We the People. You have been raped or sexually assaulted 5 different times by 5 different men. How many of those 5 men have ever been caught or punished?
None. Not one. And I've also been sexually assaulted by a woman.
Lynette asked us to not show her face and not use her last name in this interview. She doesn't want to be recognized in public, but you will certainly recognize her employer. We'll get to that in a moment.
I feel betrayed.
This is Lynette before she was raped. She's fine with us showing her face here because she figures most people wouldn't recognize her from these photos because of how she changed after the attacks.
Hurting myself, dressing like a bum so that people wouldn't notice me, not bathing so people didn't want to be around me.
She was a young actress who wanted something more, so she joined the most respected institution in America, the U.S. military, which also happens to be reeling from an epidemic of sexual assaults.
I was a woman in a man's army. I should have expected it.
The government believes her story. She's getting taxpayer-funded benefits and care for military sexual trauma, or MST for short. And when we say she's part of an epidemic, we'll let the VA's own video speak to that.
About 1 in 4 women who use VA care have experienced MST. But almost half of all veterans in VA care who experienced MST are men.
And Pentagon records show more than 6,000 reports of sexual assaults each year, and countless others go unreported. And of those who do speak up, 58% say they face retaliation.
And I had one guy that was in the airborne who was sexually assaulted, and he was told that because you're a jumper, if you even mention anything about that, I know the person that prepares the parachutes, we can make an accident happen.
Ezel Harris says many others don't report rapes because they're too ashamed, and he ought to know.
As I was lying in bed, and the other service member decided to jump on top of me. To say that you were raped, it does something to your manhood. I still haven't told really any members of my family. I've got 8 siblings.
Why would you not tell your own family, but you would agree to an on-camera interview with me?
It's much easier to talk to someone you don't know than someone that's close to you.
Ezel plunged into depression and got addicted to pain pills. Lynette got depressed and tried to take her own life.
One was through cutting, another was through trying to drown myself.
And several other veterans told us very similar stories by phone. And a survey of service women and women veterans listed not combat, but sexual assault as the #1 factor in struggles with mental health, which brings us to the suicide crisis.
Those at least 20 suicides a day were veterans.
And the opioid crisis.
The agency has been overprescribing painkillers
that have shamed the VA and stumped the politicians for years. They all appear to be at least partly linked, but Congress will not pass a bipartisan plan to crack down on sexual abuse in the military.
Where's the accountability for failure?
The plan in Congress would have allowed military prosecutors to lead sex crime investigations instead of the commanders. But the Pentagon opposed and stalled it on grounds that it would compromise the chain of command, even though the Army documented how the chain of command can break down in their own videos.
He said, "That is my battle buddy's career that you're about to mess with." He asked me if I was dreaming. He asked me if I was lying. The next day, they tried to tell me that I was getting chaptered out for having a lack of integrity.
Last year, as the Me Too wave rocked Hollywood and the news media and Congress, the military weathered a wave of scandals that did not draw as much attention. From drill sergeants accused of assaulting female recruits, to the wild parties on the 7th Fleet Command Ship, to Marines who secretly recorded and shared pictures of service women in showers, with posts urging other Marines to assault them.
The Marine Corps I've served for over 40 years has a problem, and we intend to fix it.
Do you agree with me this is one of the darkest moments and it needs to be fixed?
Yes, sir.
Survivors say it may be easier to hammer a Hollywood producer or a TV host than officers in the most respected institution in America. But they say the armed forces need the same kind of reckoning.
They don't know what they're investigating. They don't know how to ask the right questions.
And many of the assailants never face justice.
The one was told to stay away from my unit.
That was his punishment. He needs to stay away from you.
I asked if anything else could be done. And they told me because he was not in my chain of command, and due to his rank, nothing could be done.
Again, Lynette said she was attacked 6 times, but says she only reported 2.
Why didn't you report the other 4?
I knew nothing would happen.
Military leaders say that has to change, and they're working to drive change that may take off when more survivors like Ezel and Lynette speak out.
I felt alone until I went to a treatment center in September, and it made me realize how much I wasn't alone and how actually mild my case was in comparison to others.
Coming up, response from the VA, and a closer look at the sexual misconduct accusations within Congress. Continuing our investigation of sexual assaults in the military, we have new numbers from the VA. As of December 31st, more than 50,000 veterans were receiving benefits for disability related to military sexual trauma. That is more than double since 2013, 5 times more than 2008, when some 10,000 were receiving such benefits. Meanwhile, Congress still won't release all the names of the federal lawmakers who used our money, taxpayer money, to settle sexual harassment claims against them. We learned that one of them is Pennsylvania Congressman Pat Meehan. He announced that he's not seeking re-election after those allegations that he settled a claim with our money came to light. And by the way, he was a member of the committee investigating sexual harassment claims in Congress. Coming up, what to expect next week as this House FBI memo pulls focus. So we're already seeing very different interpretations of that FBI memo right down partisan lines, but this will now all come down to the Mueller investigation, his questioning of President Trump, when that will play out, and look for this investigation to wrap up in spring, perhaps by May of this year. That's our show, folks. We will see you again next week. Take care.